Hi everyone, I'm Allison. Thank you for joining me for Where I'm From 96 with Elizabeth, who, if you know her, you might call her Beth, but her name, her pen name, her is like her formal name, Elizabeth. Anyway, I read A Living Remedy by Nicole Chung, and I loved it. I loved her first book, All You Can Ever Know, which was about her journey as being she's adopted and her journey being the only Korean grief about her parents' deaths and navigating the healthcare system as an uninsured person. Hi, Beth. Oh,
Hi,
it's falling.
Allison.
How are you,
I'm
Elizabeth, Marian, Charles?
I'm good. How are you, Allison?
I'm good. This my phone is wanting to attack me. Stay. Um, uh, what are you reading?
I I'm reading How to Do
Oh
Nothing
yeah,
by Jenny Odell, which I think was maybe you recommended her new one,
I
but
recommend both
yeah,
highly.
we talked about it
Yeah,
at least. Yeah, I
yeah.
remember. Um,
They're not breezy. They're not breezy reads.
no, they're not. They're not. And so I'm working my way through it.
Yeah,
And I
I
just Easy Beauty by Chloe Cooper Jones, and I
okay.
loved that one.
That's
Yeah,
that's been on my list as well. You know, the list is very long,
very, very
and
well.
it just kind of depends which ones you get or which ones keep getting repeated to you. And that happened to me with Jenny Odell's books, and I really am like glad I read them when I'm finished, and even while I'm reading them. But they're not breezy, and I feel like they will be textbooks. Like they will be reference books in future college courses if they're not already.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, they have a lot. She's packing so much into them, which is like really, I admire a lot from
Yeah.
like a writer perspective, right?
Right.
Like how she's pulling in all these threads, which is something Chloe Cooper Jones did too
Yeah.
in Easy Beauty, and I had so much admiration for it. But yes, it definitely um, they're dense. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
you feel like, I think as a writer, you appreciate it in a different way because you know the process. You know that it's like a ballerina, making it look easy is only because you're so skilled at it.
Yeah.
It's and all the work that goes into it. So I always feel like, thank you for doing all this work, author. So I don't need to go read these 30 different source materials. I can
Yes.
just read your book. Thank you.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
So, anything else before you read your poem, or would you just? I think is your mom here? Charles is here.
Yeah, that's my mom. Yeah.
Hi, mom.
Yes. I think probably some other, I don't know. Yeah.
It's nice.
Yeah.
It's nice to have virtual support. I think you feel it.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. And it's cool to, this is the joy of the virtual stuff, right? That
Yes.
my mom couldn't attend something most likely that I would be doing here, like in
Yes.
person, but she can attend.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes. Almost every call I'm on is there. She is Harding. What you just said. Yeah. Most of the calls I'm on, no one lives in California. Like nowhere nearby. Well, the call we're on regularly, one person lives in California, but
Yeah.
two people.
Yeah.
Okay, I
I
take it all back.
was like, actually, there's a few of you in
I take
California.
it all back. Other calls.
Yeah.
Other calls. Okay. Well, would you like to read your beautiful poem?
Yeah. Sure. Uh, okay, where I'm from. I am from gravel lawns, from country crock and reduced fat cheese. I am from ranch style ramblers and old cotton fields. Tan, stuccoed, the creosote and whetstone smell of the desert after rain. I am from aloe vera, saguaro, agave, guarded exteriors with wet, tender flesh. I am from card games and long limbs, from Joey and Arlene. I'm from tall tales and the importance of education, from be quiet in church or we can't go to the symphony later. I'm from Menno's pacifism, Calvin's predestination, and save yourself for marriage. I'm from Phoenix, Jemez Springs, and Odessa, peanut bars and chocolate everything. From the boat Lydia boarded to save her sons a life in the coal mines, the tumor that laced my grandmother's lungs. Alongside Oak Creek is a cabin filled with Navajo rugs and owls my grandma left before she died, and my father's ghost is there too, and one day mine will walk the pine needle strewn path, telling our stories again.
That was beautiful. As I said before you started, what I of course, as I think you know, I have had family who live in near Oak Creek, so that part really resonates with me and all of that. But and what was it like for you writing it? Did it just come out in one thing, or did you improvise? Or
I did write it pretty quickly. I had been thinking kind of a lot about it in the weeks leading up, because I kind of everything in this is in Arizona, but
hmm
I only lived there for like the first 8 years of my life or so. And so I was kind of trying to decide, like, do I want to kind of, have a combination of places? But I think like when I think about where I'm from or those sensory details, I actually did just revisit. We lived in Michigan for 4 years, and I was there for a wedding, and I just revisited like that old home too. And I have a lot of great memories there. But I think that like when I think about kind of where I'm from, that like Arizona is what comes to mind. And I did return when I was in graduate school. I went to grad school in,
hmm
and so, I have some adult memories too. We went back over the years because we have family there. We have this cabin. So it is a place I've returned to a lot. But that question or that idea of where I'm from has always been a really slippery one for me to answer. Um, you know, like when people ask me, where I'm from, I've lived
hmm
in, I think it's 6, 7 states now at this point, and I move frequently, and I generally say I'm from the Pacific Northwest because that's where
Yeah,
my family is. So like
yeah.
when we're going home to visit family,
Mhm.
that's where we're going most of the time, or
I was
sometimes.
really surprised when I read your poem
Yeah.
because most of your writing, also your current
Hmm.
writing, centers around the Pacific Northwest. So
Right.
I was like, I knew you had this cabin on Oak Creek,
Hmm.
but I don't think I knew you lived in Arizona until you were 8. So it was just a really like, for me, it was really fascinating. I love it when someone I know, their poem is a surprise. Like that's it speaks to the power of the prompt that it digs
Yeah.
further back than oftentimes we will exchange in life.
Hmm.
We don't often talk about, so what was life like when you were 8 or 6 or,
Right.
but it's so formative.
Hmm. Yeah. And there is, like when I return to Arizona or when I visit, like I do have this sense of like of resonance,
hmm
or just kind of this sense of familiarity. And so yeah, or that's like a landscape that feels very um yeah, just familiar to me, right?
Yeah,
Or like kind of those smells that feel.
the
Um
smells for sure.
yeah.
Like, and you don't, for me, sometimes I'll have one I forgot, which is always a really interesting experience. Like, oh, this smell, because I don't think of myself as someone who's really keyed into smells that much.
Mhm.
So it's like interesting. And have you read Braiding Sweetgrass? Because I often think of that when we have these conversations. And she talks about, Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about how the natural world that we live in, they're our friends and they're who we know,
Right.
and they influence the way our lives are lived and how we move through the world. And I love that because I feel that way about the landscape here. And with the group that I was reading it with, someone was a transplant and they were just like, ugh, like they feel like it's really sad, the landscape
Right. Right.
here. And it was just interesting to me to have it framed in that way because in these poems, mostly, even if the poems are about sad things or trauma, the natural components are communicated with love.
Yeah. And I sort of I read, like the sample ones you said, and I sent, and I looked at a couple others, and I've like listened to a few of the lives, but I also kind of deliberately was trying to like focus on
Yeah.
my own, like kind of
Hmm.
like do my own thing. And but yeah, those I think that's one of the things I appreciate about the prompt is the way that it grounds us back into the material world, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, with love and like with a kind of tenderness
Yeah.
that um, I was talking with my husband when we were visiting Michigan about like what a miracle Michigan felt like, coming from the desert. And I visited other places. My grandparents lived in Spokane, so I'd seen like trees before, right? But like, as like a kid growing up in the desert and reading about, the East Coast for the most part,
Hmm.
right? It seems
Yeah.
like most books are set like in the
Especially, I feel
coast.
like children's books, like
Mhm.
especially ones that I
Yeah.
read. I mean, Judy Blume,
Yeah,
that really clearly,
exactly.
these sort of
Exactly.
touchstones.
And I think some of that has changed since then, but especially when I was a kid, it was like,
Babysitter's Club.
or
Sorry.
yeah, exactly. Like Boxcar Children,
Sweet
right?
Valley
Like
High.
the like, or British. I read a lot of
Hmm.
British stuff too,
Yep. Secret
So
Garden.
yeah. And
Marian.
so there was this sense of just when we moved to Michigan, like I was fascinated by
Hmm.
acorns, I was like
Hmm.
I collected them because like, oh my gosh, there's so many acorns. I'd never like maybe I'd seen an acorn before, but I'd never had them in my yard before, like
Yep.
um that it was or like, things like we could have a garden, like
Yep.
things grew,
Hmm.
and just like this sense of like wonder really of like
And
kind of
of
the world.
plenty too. I
Yeah,
think
an
this,
abundance. Yeah,
yeah.
like the world kind of revealing itself to me in a totally different way
Mhm.
than it did when I was in Arizona, right?
Yeah.
um and I do, I find a lot of beauty in the desert. I love the desert. There's a
Hmm.
lot of life in the desert, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, uh, but I do remember this and this, yeah, just this sense of like, just the world being completely kind of different than I had experienced up until that point. And even then when we moved, because then we moved to Oregon from there, and then there were like blackberries everywhere,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh,
Hmm.
you can just eat food like that grows, right?
Yes. Yes. So that's why I would visit cousins in Northern California. And it was like, it was the most magical. And I grew up on the beach. So I think a lot of people are like, you grew up on the beach. And it is magical and wonderful. And it's so much a part of who I am. But it just reminds me of, and when I moved to Colorado in high school, I really was like, oh, a deer, like over and over
Yeah.
again, a deer. I was so excited there were deer. And of course, people who lived there were like, oh my God, yeah, there's a lot of deer.
Yeah,
Be
and they
quiet,
ate
you know?
our gardens and they, yeah.
And I was just, I mean, it was magical to me. Um, and I think I've sort of taken that attitude then when I came back here. I'm like that. I'm the person who, if you go on a walk with, is like a hummingbird, a butterfly, a hawk. Like that's
Right.
just because to me, it does, they do feel like my friends.
Mm-hmm.
Like there is this feeling of like, oh, I'm not alone.
Mm-hmm.
Like this whole world is here. And I think in a way, it kind of helps to go somewhere else. Like you see, like, oh, this is this place. And I think it helped me appreciate where I was from.
Exactly. And I think that that is one of the gifts of moving a lot,
Yeah, for sure.
which, there's a lot of things that I don't love about that, or that are challenging
For
about
sure.
that. But, I live in Florida right now, kind of near, like along the
Yeah.
coast or like, near the coast. And, um, we have dolphins,
Yeah.
and like I will never get tired of seeing a
Me
dolphin.
neither.
Like I don't think ever, right?
I am still always pointing at the ocean and screaming, dolphins!
Yeah, yeah,
Always.
yeah. And and I talked about that with our neighbor who had like, lived here and grew up here, and she's like, "Oh, I don't get tired of them either," right? And she's lived here her entire life, right? Um,
Dolphins. They're
but
amazing.
but yeah, I mean, but I do think that sometimes we can lose perspective, or we don't have, when we encounter a new place, or when we kind of re-encounter a place that we live after travel or something. I was
Yeah,
just traveling, and um, that there can be, I mean, I think that's one of the gifts of it, right? Like that reignition
definitely.
of that sense of wonder, or that sense of kind of, kind of being defamiliarized from the familiar, right? And
Mhm.
then returning to it and seeing it in a new way.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's one of the gifts of, even though it's something I also, have mourned or have
Yeah,
struggled with, not having roots, not having
yeah.
like a strong sense of place,
Hmm.
like, I like living in Florida, like I don't know the names of any of the plants, and
Hmm.
that's hard. Um,
She says that in writing Sweetgrass, that when she moves, she like
yeah,
purposefully learns the names because she feels like she's with strangers if
yes,
she's not, which I thought was interesting because I sort of accept that I don't know the names, but I still feel this familiarity, like of it's okay, it's okay, like it's just not. I'm also not a biologist.
right.
I mean,
Yeah,
she is that,
yes,
you know.
I'll admit I haven't finished braiding Sweetgrass. I'm like partway
Well,
through
it's
it, and
another one
it's
that's
another
like you're
dense
going
one.
to be. I'm only bringing up dense books that make me look smart. But then I end up referencing that's the
Yeah,
thing, like they do stick
absolutely.
with me, if only for the few point like this point, especially doing these poems, has really it, validated or feel like, oh, this gives me a new understanding of this knowledge that I've been carrying with me,
Hmm.
which I think is
Yeah,
what books like these specifically have to offer. Like they name the thing
right,
that I know
right,
or I'm grappling with understanding. And
absolutely.
I'm so grateful that someone's doing the work. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And I don't even know, like I knew the names of some of the plants when I was in Arizona, but I was also a kid, like
Yeah.
to some extent they're kind of part of your landscape, and you don't always, um, you know, I mean, I certainly knew, what a saguaro was, or like a
Well, and they're
cactus, or,
so, I mean, they hit you like when you see them, they're impactful.
right,
It's like
right, right,
everyone knows.
right, right. Um, but to some extent, I also didn't have that awareness as a kid, right? It was
Mm-hmm.
just sort of, the yeah, the landscape I moved through with familiarity, but not always that like awareness. So it was nice to revisit it as an adult too. I mean, partly, I mean, when I was in grad school, it was really interesting to revisit
Yeah.
it as an
Yeah.
adult. But when I was working on this prompt too, yeah, like how do you name the thing, right? Rather than like putting those names or those um, labels on the experience, right? That kind of help. I mean, and this is what we do as writers, right? We look for just the right kind of combination of words, the right combination, just the right phrase that captures the thing that is like unsayable,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Uh, so it was an interesting, it was a really fun and interesting kind of experiment
Okay.
doing that.
Good. It's lovely to hear that. And it's just good to see you in a different context and hear your writing.
Yeah.
Do you have any other last thoughts before we wrap up?
Um, no, I don't think so. This was, yeah, I don't, I mean, I don't really like write poetry normally. So
Right?
that was also an exercise in like
Mhm.
humility and, just sort of like, all right, let's, um, this doesn't have to be perfect, but I think it's the magic of the prompt
It is.
too. That it kind of helps, and what it unlocks, right?
Yeah.
Um, that I don't have to consider myself a poet, right?
No, and I think we all have that. And I think poetry is a part of us, is something I've sort of come to realize over the course of these years is,
Absolutely.
it's not a gatekeeping thing, which I think is how I was introduced to it, certainly, and grew up in it. And in fact, it's the opposite. It's just a part of us.
Yeah.
So it's nice to reclaim things that are a part of us that someone told us that weren't ours. I mean, that was certainly the relationship that I had with it. It was like I had to earn it,
Yeah. Mhm.
earn the access. Like, no, actually, it's there. So,
Right,
um,
which I know is part of this project for you, which
mhm.
is awesome. I love that. And I definitely experienced that too. So,
Oh, good.
yeah.
That makes me really happy.
Yeah.
Um, well, it's a pleasure to see you and hear you. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah.
And
Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you,
yes, I'll
Allison.
see you soon.
Sounds
Okay.
okay.
Bye.
Bye.